Our bias Coach Rob, and welcome to the Coach's Log here at Pause Performance Coaching. And this week I want to talk to you guys and gals a lot about FTP. It comes up a lot lately, and there's some reasons for that. This week we're going to break it out into 3 Coach's Logs. Today we're going to talk about what FTP is, why it's not the gold standard of performance measurements for cyclists as well as runners. And then we're also going to talk about how to have your best FTP test. And also we're going to talk about some of the timing of FTP tests this week. We might have some other things in there too, but that's what's coming to mind right in this minute. As you've probably learned, these coaches' logs are not scripted. Most of what comes out of these are from conversations that I've had with my athletes, some people online, and maybe you on the YouTube channel where you've sent in a comment, which quite honestly, we haven't had a whole lot of that, and I hope that changes very soon. If the content isn't to your liking, or you are one of my athletes, of course, you can certainly reach me in the normal ways that you do. But if it's for those of you who I don't coach and you've got questions, don't hesitate. Leave a comment or go out to pauseperformancecoaching.com and go to the Contact Us page, and that's where you can leave a message. All right, so let's start this off with what is FTP to be believed? What is that measure? And why do I say believe? Because let me tell you, there are probably a dozen or more definitions of FTP. And this is the one that I work from. And it's a kind of a mishmash of most of them. The general rule of thumb is that functional threshold power is what is believed to be the power that you can sustain for 45 minutes to an hour at maximum effort as you are fueled. It's a horrible definition. There's really no strong metric or measure. We test anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes in length. The 20-minute test is the most common test, and that test comes about in any number of factors. You can do it indoors on a smart trainer, classic trainer, rollers, or you can do them outdoors. You can do them in flat ground, rolling ground, hills. It does not matter. It does to an extent, depending on your discipline. Runners, on the other hand, typically don't do FTP tests. Not in my practice, they don't. Instead, we follow a very special formula for critical power. In FTP tests for cycling, we take a 20-minute test, and we take 95% of that and of your average power over 20 minutes, and that becomes the new FTP. Is that right? It is in my practice. I've tried many formats for testing for FTP. And let's say why. Why do we even bother with an FTP test if it's not the gold standard? Well, that's easy. I use it for setting training zones. That's what FTP is primarily used for in my practice, is for setting training zones. And in this practice, we're looking at zones 1 through 6, sometimes 7. We only train from zones 1 to 5. Quite honestly, it's really impossible to be staring at a bike computer in zone 6, zone 7, simply because it's a maximum effort. It's all out. And the duration of time for those intervals is incredibly small. Zone 7 would be a peak, would be like 1 second of your best all-out power. Zone 6 would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 10, maybe 5 seconds. Everything else starts to grow from there as you go down in intensity as far as length of interval. But FTP in itself, as I said earlier, let's go ahead and jump ahead. Now that you kind of understand what FTP is, why I use it in my practice, primarily for not so much to gauge fitness. That does help. There are other things that we're going to mention in this that I look into for the gauging of fitness and improvement in performance. But when you understand that FTP is one of many measures that you can utilize to gauge if you're moving your needle forward, it's helpful. It's not the end all to be all. I will say this, and I have written this, that a focus on FTP is good for most athletes. And I used to say that moving the FTP needle up, moving your FTP forward to a higher number, floats all boats. Meaning that typically if you have more of a focus on FTP, you can anticipate an improvement on the power curve. Power curve meaning at the bottom, we're starting the zone 1, very low intensity, and at the top, we're talking about very high intensity numbers. Sometimes it's this way. And depending on the charts and the graphs that you're using, you can set them up your own way. All right, so why isn't it the gold standard? Well, I almost hate quoting this particular person. I'm not even going to mention his name. He's kind of a vulcanizing individual in coaching circles. But the general quote is this: the truest measure of performance is performance itself. And that goes to another concept of specificity. So if you are a triathlete or a duathlete and you are focused on your bike split this season, you're trying to improve your performance on the bike split, definitely focusing on your 20-minute, 30-minute threshold numbers is not a bad idea, when you're looking at your training plan. But there's a lot to be said about low intensity durability, aerobic durability. How much time can you actually spend in the saddle without your heart rate drifting upwards? That's a great way to spend some time. It's also not a bad idea to do a little VO2 work. Now, as a criterium specialist, where we're on the gas, off the gas, on the gas, off the gas, do you think that doing a lot of 20-minute efforts during a race season is a great idea? Maybe not. It depends on what's going on with your level of fitness. We would certainly find that we would probably be better served in specific work doing things along the lines of 2 minutes all the way up to maybe 6-minute max level intervals. And then, of course, there's no shortage of 30 by 30, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, sprint efforts, whether it's a form sprint or a full sprint, jumps, bursts, micro bursts. That's a steady diet for a criterium specialist. Road racers, you're going to find that there's a mix. That's the beauty of road racing. You're going to do a lot of endurance work. You're going to have some sweet spot work, and you're going to do a smattering of high intensity work. It also is gender dependent. Women, especially at the elite level, their road races are much shorter than men's races. And there is a requirement for higher levels of training or higher levels of intensity added to your training. And the duration isn't as long as a men's race. So as I said, specificity is king. If you're still not 100% sure what I mean by that, whether you're a club rider or a runner or anything like that, and you've got your power files, the best way that you can really start to get a handle on this is you take your power file. You can use services like Training Peaks or Golden Cheetah. And then what I suggest doing is this: start looking for intervals. How long did it take you to crest that hill? Your favorite club ride, the Tuesday night worlds, the Thursday night throwdown, Friday night fights, whatever you want to call it. Take a look at those files. You can use Training Peaks, you could use Golden Cheetah, smooth the data, and then start looking for long duration efforts. There are formulas inside of Golden Cheetah that will allow you to find intervals. You can start looking at, and you can look over a course of a week, 2, 6, maybe even an entire season to discover that, quite honestly, most of your racing is spent in maybe a 2-minute to 6-minute interval. Well, guess what? There it is. There's the specifics. And how intense were those intervals? Are we talking 120, 130% of FTP? Or are we only talking 80 to 90% of FTP? That is another reason for having FTP. So we use it, I like to use it as the foundation of my testing protocol. I've said that it's not the gold standard, as you just learned here, that depending on the style of racing, the discipline of racing, you may start to discover that there are other means and methods. You may even want to start thinking about doing something akin to a power profile test. Now, my problem with power profiling testing, as it's been laid out in other books and articles, is that it quite often uses the power profile chart that you can find in the book on racing and training with a power meter. My problem with that chart is we know it's flawed big time, especially when we start looking at the higher end numbers and the fact that it's not age graded. If you're not familiar with the concept of age grading, it is actually something that's been around for a very long time in the running world. So you take a look at this table of data, and you're like, how does this apply to me? There's absolutely no way at age 60 I'm going to be able to produce 310, 320 watts for 20 minutes as a Cat 3 as a 60-year-old. You might be able to, but I would probably agree with you, especially if you've been at it for a while and you've never hit that number. We might be able to work with you. It just depends on where you are physically and experientially. So back to the fact that it's not the gold standard. Once again, the best measure of performance is the performance itself. The other thing too is specificity is king. Those are the two big takeaways. The FTP is not, that measure, that test is not without its merits. It allows you to set your training zones. It also allows you to work from a percentage base. I think that's the other thing that my athletes, it takes them a little bit, to get used to, is that sometimes if I don't give a strict structured workout, I'll say, hey, go out, ride for an hour, 2 hours, and I want you to throw in 5 efforts at 80 to 95% of FTP. At the end of that ride, give yourself a couple minutes break in between. Very simple set of instructions, doesn't necessarily need a fit training file. Sometimes I provide them, and sometimes it's just a last minute, tweak to a schedule when I get a call, but that's how we do it. We also use that percentage as a gas gauge, especially in racing. And in the upcoming video, I'm going to also teach you about how to use that FTP score going forward for future testing. All right, everybody, that's all the time I'm going to give to this particular topic on FTP. So look forward to the next video here in a couple of days. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your training week.